Hello, I'm Edward Shelswell White, and this is the Signal Report for March 2024. On the macro front, we're moderating our expectations and now see recession as more likely than we did in previous months. Perhaps not the most likely outcome, but more likely than before. Although GDP growth is solid and yet not high enough to point to overheating economy by itself, and energy prices year over year are rising, which should dampen economic activity somewhat, and unemployment trends aren't doing much either way. Still, inflation each month, whilst dropping year over year, has exceeded expectations by a couple of tenths of a percent in each of the last several months. And the general feeling now is that rather than six rate cuts this year, aggregating to a couple of points reduction in the Fed benchmark rate, three or fewer cuts now totaling a point or so. And that assumes no further inflation surprises. And we believe inflation will tend to prove more stubborn than people have generally expected. Why? Well, because what is largely overlooked in discussion of inflation these days is the root cause of it worldwide. Sure, governments may have made policy decisions here and there to make inflation better or worse in some countries than in others, but the underlying truth is that we know from economic history that inflation tends to occur when the world economic order recalibrates itself as it is now doing. And until that recalibration is complete, even before factoring in unwelcome surprises in the supply chain, like this week's collapse of the Key Bridge serving the port of Baltimore, inflation is likely to persist at a level above the Fed's 2% target rate, limiting the Fed's ability to cut rates. Complicating the Fed's task is that a recession in this context of global reordering would not necessarily reduce inflation, leaving the Fed with an unenviable choice: either reduce rates despite higher inflation in order to combat recession, thereby increasing upward pressure on prices and inflation, or hold the line on interest rates in order to combat inflation, increasing drag on the economy. The only way to square this circle, by the way, is not with monetary policy tools that the Fed has, but with fiscal policy to spur supply side investment by reducing marginal tax rates on income and capital gains and reducing regulatory burdens. But with the U.S. current administration opposed to such policies politically, those options would tend to be off the table, leaving the Fed to fight inflation with only monetary policy and hoping against hope for an inflationary deus ex machina. We don't expect one. So what does this mean for the U.S. aviation industry? We're still dealing with third quarter 2023 data here, though we expect to have Q4 data in a week or so. So the April report should be updated. But the industry remains incentivized to shrink relative to GDP. Costs continue to rise faster than revenues, driving operating income sharply lower. And remember, in 2023, very little of the cost of new pilot contract are reflected on airlines' income statements, and those will tend to hit this year, driving up operating costs and increasing pressure to get higher average fares. And just this past week, Southwest Airlines reached agreement with its flight attendants on a new contract that will increase its cost by another 5% annually over the next 5 years. And other airlines are bound to follow suit, given the strong hand unions have been dealt, and to their credit, are playing very well, because the effect of intergenerational demographics on the size of the labor pool. It's a good time to be an airline union leader for sure. As it has been for decades, airline revenue as a percentage of GDP continues to fall, and this is by design. It's a feature of the system, not a bug. Because despite higher average fares and because airlines continue to be under pressure from all sides, workforce shortages, supply chain uncertainty, demand realignment, and the higher cost of everything, these pressures are causing airlines to be inclined to shrink relative to GDP in order to maximize operating margins and return on invested capital. The problem is airlines aren't tracking towards improved ROIC because costs are rising faster than revenues. And as we've said a minute ago, these cost trends are likely to get worse in 2024 as increased labor costs are reflected in airlines' income statements. So given these macroeconomic and industry factors, airlines are under pressure to increase unit revenues to meet their profitability goals. In markets they perceive as inelastic, They will tend to do this by increasing fares and maintaining capacity. In markets that are more price sensitive or elastic, they'll tend to get higher fares by first reducing capacity so that they can sustain higher fares on the capacity that they maintain. Either way, if you increase the price of something, all other things being equal, people will tend to demand less of it, i.e., higher fares are not a bug of the airline industry today, but a feature intended to allow them to meet their profitability targets while flying less. What can airports do about this? Well, mainly they first need to define reality. That means understanding how profitable their service is for their airlines. And then, if competing with other airports for local passengers, what their market share is for each route and each zip code. And then, using those facts, they need to identify and then relentlessly execute a strategy and tactics to improve traffic and revenue performance of the existing airline portfolio. And then finally, communicate that strategy and its results to airlines so they know you're engaged in trying to help them be more successful at your airport. This will set you apart. If you like what you see in this video, please contact me, ESW at signalaviationconsulting.com, for access to your customized Signal Actionable Intelligence dashboard, which you can see right here. For the pass-through cost of a Tableau license, about $180 a year, you get monthly updates on the macro economy and the airline industry, just like we reviewed in this report, plus your airport's metrics pertaining to capacity and passengers versus your competitor or comparison airports, and detailed industry financials. Full Signal clients get a monthly commentary on their airport's specific situation and performance, both via their dashboard and on monthly checkpoints with Signal principals. Current market share information by route and zip code each month, 3 weeks after month end, plus route and carrier profitability each quarter as the OT updates Form 41 and DB1B. It's information like this, timely, accurate, actionable, and not elsewhere available, that gives airport leaders the management information they need to act in time to affect their outcomes. Well, that's it for the March Signal Report. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Edward Shelswell White. I look forward to seeing you back here in late April when we provide our next installment of the Signal Report to help you find the signal in the noise.